Full story. Your beta sealed the doors. The waitress whispered to the Alpha King. Moments before the music stopped. True life narrative. One part, third person. Your beta sealed the doors. The waitress whispered to the Alpha King. Moments before the music stopped. A story about power, patience, and the 8 words that changed everything. The ballroom smelled like money. Not the good kind of money, not the kind that comes from years of quiet work and late nights and sandwiches eaten at a desk. It smelled like the other kind, the kind that gets sprayed on before walking into a room, the kind that makes other people feel small without a single word being said. Nadia had worked enough of these events to know the difference. She could tell within the first 10 minutes whether a room full of people had earned what they had, or simply inherited the right posture to stand next to those who did. Tonight was the latter. 200 guests in a ballroom that could fit 300. Every table draped in white, every glass already half full before the evening properly started. The kind of gala where the speeches come before the food, because the people running things understand that full people pay less attention. She moved through the room with her tray the way she had learned to move through any crowded space. Quietly, efficiently, without taking up more space than the job required. She was wearing a black uniform that fit correctly. Her hair was pulled back. She had removed the small gold stud from her left ear before the shift began because the event coordinator had said, not asked, said, that accessories created an impression of informality. Nadia had taken it out. She had put it in her coat pocket. She had told herself, as she often did, that this was just a job, and the stud would go back in before she reached the car. That was how she moved through most of her days now, taking things out, putting them away, getting through. She had not always done this kind of work. 3 years ago she had done a different kind. She had sat at a desk in a building that cost more to heat per month than she made in a year, and she had built models, not the kind you assemble from a box. The kind you build in spreadsheets, in data sets, in projections that tell a company where its money is bleeding out and how to stop it. She had been good at it, genuinely good, the kind of good that is hard to fake because the numbers either hold or they do not, and hers always held. The company was called Vance Logistics. It was not a famous company, but it was a powerful one. It controlled most of the cold chain warehousing in the region, the refrigerated storage and transport that keeps food from rotting between the farm and the grocery shelf. If you had ever bought milk or medicine or anything that needed to stay cold on its way to you, there was a reasonable chance it had passed through a Vance Logistics facility. The company was everywhere, in the most invisible way possible, which was exactly how its CEO, a man named Dorian Vance, liked things to be. Dorian Vance was not the kind of man who appeared in newspapers. He did not do interviews. He did not attend conferences where people were asked their opinions on the future of the industry. He attended events like this one, black-tie corporate galas organized by people who owed him something, surrounded by a room full of people who also owed him something, eating food he had not paid for because no one would have allowed him to pay. He was 61 years old. He had the kind of face that does not look 61 because it has never been troubled by anything long enough to leave a mark. His hair was gray in the way that very expensive haircuts make gray hair look intentional. He laughed at the right moments. He touched people on the arm when he wanted them to feel trusted. He remembered names, which was not because he had a gift for it, but because he employed someone to brief him before events. He was, in the vocabulary of the people who worked around him, the Alpha King. Not a title anyone used to his face. A title that existed in the spaces between desks, in the 1-minute conversations before a meeting started, in the particular exhausted tone of voice people used when they said it. He ran the company. He made decisions that did not get questioned. He set the temperature of every room he walked into, figuratively and, given his ownership of cold chain logistics, sometimes literally. His second-in-command was a man named Kwaku. Everyone knew Kwaku was the one who actually ran things. Dorian set direction. Kwaku made it happen. He had been with the company for 11 years. He arrived before anyone else and stayed after everyone had gone. He had restructured 3 failing divisions, quietly, without fanfare, in ways that were still holding 3 years later. He was the kind of person who did not need credit for things because he understood that the work itself was the point. Or so everyone thought until they looked more closely at how little of the credit he was actually receiving and started to wonder whether he understood it or whether he had simply been trained to believe it. Nadia knew Kweku. Not well, but she knew him the way you know someone who treats you like a person when most people around them do not bother. When she had worked at Vance Logistics, he had been the only senior person who acknowledged her in hallways, who asked follow-up questions about her work, who once, in a meeting she had been invited to and then subtly sidelined in, had said, simply, without making a performance of it, "Actually, let Nadia walk through her numbers. That's what she's here for." She had walked through her numbers. The room had listened. The numbers had been right. 5 months later, she had been restructured out of her position. Role consolidation, they said. She was given a severance packet and a handshake and a LinkedIn recommendation so generic she could have written it herself. She did not make a fuss. She had no one to make a fuss to. She had a lease coming up for renewal, and a mother in another city whose medications were not cheap, and making a fuss cost a kind of energy she could not currently afford. She took the severance. She updated her resume. She sent applications. She did not hear back from most of them. The ones she did hear back from had budgets that made her old salary look like a rumor of something that had once existed. She took the catering work because it paid, and because it was flexible, and because she was tired. Not the kind of tired that a night of sleep fixes, the deeper kind, the kind that settles into a person after they have spent several months being surprised by how little the world recalibrates when someone who was doing important work quietly disappears from it. The catering company she worked for had been recommended to her, indirectly, through a chain of small connections she had not thought to trace until recently. The recommendation had come from someone who knew Kweku. She had not understood this until 2 days before the Vance Logistics Gala, when she had looked at the event details sheet and seen the client name, and felt something cold settle into her chest that had nothing to do with the refrigerators she had spent the past year reading reports about. She had considered not going. She had stood in her kitchen for 11 minutes, with the event sheet in her hand and the gold stud sitting on the counter, and she had thought seriously about calling in sick. But there were things she needed to understand, and she had learned, the hard way, the only way some lessons arrive, that understanding requires showing up, even when showing up is the last thing you want to do. So she put on the uniform. She pulled back her hair. She took out the earring. She went to work. The room was 2 hours into the evening when Nadia took her third tray from the kitchen. She had spent those 2 hours doing what she always did, observing. Not obviously, not in the way that would draw attention. She observed the way she had observed data sets, not looking for one specific thing, but staying open to everything, noticing what was present and what was not, and making note of where the two overlapped. Dorian Vance was at the center table, not the head of the room, the center of it. Tables had been arranged so that no matter where you stood, you were equidistant from him. Whether this was intentional or simply how spaces rearranged themselves around powerful people, she could not say. It did not really matter. The effect was the same. What she noticed first was that Kweku was not there. Kweku was always at these events. She had worked several Vance functions before her own departure, and he had always been present. 3 seats to Dorian's right, attentive, available. The kind of presence that a room like this needed to actually function, as opposed to simply perform functioning. His seat was empty. His name card was still there, because these things are prepared in advance, and no one had removed it, which meant his absence was not planned, or it was planned by someone other than the event coordinator. She moved through the room. She refilled glasses. She took empty plates. She was invisible in the way that people in her position are often invisible at events like this. Not because she was unnoticeable, but because the people in the room had learned very early that noticing people who serve you is a social complication they would rather not introduce. It is easier to look past. It costs nothing and requires no adjustment. It was this invisibility that allowed her to hear things. Not secrets exactly, more like the edges of things. The kinds of conversations that happen in plain sight when people believe no one is listening. A board member at one of the outer tables saying to the woman next to him that the transition is basically done. A woman in a green dress laughing a little too hard at something that was not quite funny, the laughter of someone who has recently been told good news and has not yet decided how to wear it. A man she recognized from the legal team holding his phone under the table, reading something, and then tilting it so the person beside him could read it too. The room knew something. Not all of it, but enough. At 9:14, Dorian Vance stood. The room settled the way rooms settle for men like him. Not dramatically. Not at his command. It simply occurred to everyone, all at once and without discussion, that it would be better to be quiet now. He thanked the board. He thanked the shareholders. He thanked the city, which had apparently done something recently that deserved thanks, though the specifics were left artfully vague. He spoke about growth. He spoke about the future. He used the phrase, "the next chapter," twice, and both times the room responded with applause that was too immediate to be spontaneous. This was applause that had been expected, applause that people had been prepared for. He did not mention Kwaku. Not once. Nadia was 8 feet away when it happened. She had her tray. Her face was the face she wore for work. Not blank exactly, but held in a particular neutral that she had developed over the years as a kind of professional protection. She had her thumb pressing into the edge of the tray. She did not notice she was doing it until she looked down and saw the small white mark it had made in her skin. She knew what it meant to not be mentioned. She was a person who had not been mentioned. She understood the particular grammar of an erasure that is conducted entirely in what is left out. A man who had run the operations of a company for 11 years, who had saved divisions that might otherwise have collapsed, who had been present at every one of these events for 11 years, and he did not get a sentence. He did not get a clause. He did not get the breath it would have taken to say his name. The room applauded. She stood there with her tray. At 9:37, she learned where Kwaku was. She did not learn it from a conversation. She learned it from a document, or rather, from the way a document moves through a room when someone has decided it is time for a room to see it. She had been near enough to the event coordinator's station to see a laptop screen, and on the laptop screen was an email that had been forwarded so many times it had the accordion-folded look of a thing that had passed through many hands. She read what she could in the 3 seconds she had before she needed to move. It was enough. Kwaku had submitted something. Not a resignation. Something more deliberate than that. An audit report. The third version of it, from what she could piece together. The first had been filed 18 months ago and quietly absorbed into the company's internal review process, which was a polite way of saying it had been buried. The second had been filed 8 months ago and had met a similar fate. The third had not been filed through internal channels. The third had been filed directly with the Regional Regulatory Office, with a time-stamped copy sent to 5 board members and 2 external bodies, whose names she recognized from the kind of business news she had started reading more carefully after her own departure from the company. She did not know all of what the report contained, but she knew enough about the company's operations, from her own years inside them, to understand roughly what shape the problem took. She had seen it in the data she had once been responsible for, the places where the numbers were slightly too round, the projections that curved in directions that projections should not naturally curve unless someone had helped them. She had flagged it once, informally, to a supervisor who had smiled at her and said the numbers were fine, and then had not spoken to her about anything important for the 2 months that followed before her redundancy notice arrived. She stood near the coordinator's station for one breath longer than she needed to. Then she picked up her tray and moved back into the room. Her chest felt like it did in the first seconds after cold water, that tight, clarifying shock where everything becomes very still and very simple. At 9:41, Dorian Vance raised his empty glass in her direction. He did not look at her. He looked at the glass. His head was slightly turned, still angled toward the board member on his left, still mid-sentence, in a conversation she was not part of, and was not meant to be part of. The glass was simply extended, a gesture that assumed it would be received, because in his experience, gestures like this were always received. She came to the table, she poured. She was close enough to see the small things, the way the collar of his jacket sat, the particular angle of his shoulders. The phone on the table, face down. The two board members flanking him, both absorbed in their own conversation, not watching. She poured. At the front of the room, the band was playing something slow, the kind of song that exists not to be listened to, but to provide a polite buffer between one part of an evening and the next. It was working. No one was listening to the music. Everyone was talking. She set the bottle back on her tray. She did not move away immediately. She did what servers sometimes do at these moments. She tilted her head, slightly, as if checking whether there was anything else needed. This was a gesture that looked like professional attentiveness. It was not that. She leaned forward by 4 inches. No more than that. Just enough. She said it the way you state a fact about the weather to someone who has not looked out the window yet. Your beta sealed the doors. 8 words. Quiet. Even. Gone before the air around them had time to carry them anywhere. She straightened. She lifted her tray. She moved to the next table. She did not look back. She did not need to. She had worked with data long enough to know what a confirmation looks like. It looks like the absence of a counter-argument. It looks like a pause in a room where pauses do not naturally occur. It looks like a man's hand moving to a phone that has been face down all evening and flipping it over. She heard it. The sound of the phone being picked up. She was at the next table, pouring. Her face was the face she wore for work. What happened next happened in stages. The way things always happen when something that has been building for a long time finally arrives. Not in a rush, not in a crash, in a series of small, ordinary-looking events that only reveal their true shape when you step back and see them together. The first thing was the sound the ventilation system made when someone activated the fire suppression protocol in the building's facilities management panel. It was not a dramatic sound. It was a low, mechanical shifting, the sound of large-scale infrastructure doing something it had been designed to do. Most people in the room did not recognize it. Some did. The exit doors did not fly open. They did not slam. They simply stopped responding to the push-bar sensors, the way doors in large commercial buildings stop responding when a suppression protocol has been initiated and the system is waiting for a safety check-in. The event coordinator would need to verify with the facilities management contact before the system would release. The facilities management contact for this building was listed in the building's internal documentation as Kweku Asante Boateng, Secondary Compliance Liaison, Vance Logistics. The role was a secondary designation, technically within his portfolio, rarely scrutinized, so routine as to be invisible. He had requested the maintenance window for a suppression system test 6 weeks ago, then rescheduled it again. The third scheduling request had been approved 10 days prior. The approved date was tonight. The music stopped, not in the way music stops when a song finishes, in the way music stops when someone has disconnected the power supply to the speakers because the suppression protocol had flagged an electrical safety check in the audio system circuit. The silence arrived mid-phrase, on an unresolved note, and sat in the room like something dropped. 200 people looked up, and then the phone started, not all at once, in the staggered, rolling way that a room full of phones receives a message when a shared document is sent to a large distribution list, and each phone retrieves it according to its own connection speed and notification settings. First one, then 3 more, then a row of them, then the whole room, slowly, like a tide coming in sideways. The document was the audit report, all 3 versions, with full timestamps showing when each had been submitted, what had been done with it internally, and what had not. The distribution had been sent from Kweku's own authorized access account to an address list that included every person in that room, board members, shareholders, senior staff, 2 external regulatory liaisons who had been quietly added to the mailing list 8 months ago and had been waiting, ever since, to receive exactly this. Nadia set her tray on the side table near the kitchen entrance. She did it carefully. The kind of careful that is not caution but habit, the muscle memory of someone who has handled breakable things in public for long enough that the care has become automatic. She stood near the wall. She watched the room. It was extraordinary, the way a room full of powerful people looks when the thing they thought they were managing slips out of their hands. There was no shouting. There was no scene. There was a very particular quality of silence that falls when 200 people receive the same piece of information at the same time, and every single one of them needs a moment to recalibrate what they thought they were in the middle of. Tables that had been relaxed were suddenly leaning inward. Phones were being held differently, no longer as accessories but as documents. 3 people near the back of the room had already stepped away from their seats and were standing in small clusters with the body language of people who are deciding very quickly which side of a line they are on. Dorian Vance was still at his table. He had not stood. He had not made any visible gesture. He was reading his phone. His face was doing the thing she had expected. It was not changing. That was the most telling thing about a face that has spent 60 years being composed. It stays composed even when composure is the only thing left. His right hand, though. His right hand had found the edge of the tablecloth, and his fingers were pressing into it in a way that would leave a crease. She recognized the gesture. She had made it herself, 3 years ago, at a desk in a building she would never work in again, holding the edge of a report she had just been told was fine when she knew it was not fine, pressing her fingers into the paper, because the paper was there, and because there was nothing else she could do with the feeling that had nowhere else to go. She did not feel triumph. She had wondered over the years whether she would, whether this moment, if it ever came, and she had never been certain it would feel like something lit up, something warm. It did not feel like that. It felt like being very still inside. The way a room feels after a long noise has finally stopped, and you can hear what was always underneath it. The exit doors opened 40 minutes later, after the facilities coordinator verified the protocol reset. People left the way people leave when they are in a hurry to be somewhere else and do not want to appear to be. With purpose, with their phones already at their ears, with the specific brisk walk of people who have moved from attendees to participants in something they had not anticipated attending. The regulatory office would receive a formal submission on Monday morning. Nadia knew this not because she had been told, but because she understood how these things worked. And more importantly, she understood how Kwaku worked. He did not do anything incompletely. He did not start what he could not finish. He had filed the report 3 times because he believed in giving a system the chance to correct itself before forcing it to. He had given the system 18 months. The system had chosen not to, so he had finished it. Nadia picked up her tray from the side table. She carried it back to the kitchen. She helped the other catering staff stack the unused glassware and break down the linen stations and load the equipment trolleys. She did this work the way she did all work, thoroughly, without cutting corners, without needing to be watched to do it correctly. Before she left the building, she put the small gold stud back in her left ear. It went in easily, as it always did. The hole had never closed. Some things do not close just because you stop using them for a while. She walked out into the night air, which was cold and ordinary, and smelled like a city going about its business. Buses, food from a nearby restaurant, rain from earlier in the evening, still sitting in the creases of the pavement. She had a folder at home. It had been in a kitchen drawer for 3 years, beneath the takeout menus, behind the batteries she kept meaning to sort. The folder contained documents. Not documents she had taken, documents that had been forwarded to her, at a time when she could not have known what they were for, by a person who understood their value, even if she could not yet act on it. She had kept them because she was an analyst, and she understood that data does not expire, it waits. In 3 weeks, she would be asked to give a voluntary statement to the regulatory body reviewing the Vance Logistics audit. She would bring the folder. She would sit in a chair across from a person with a notepad, and she would walk through her numbers the way she had always walked through numbers, clearly, in order, with the evidence laid out so that the shape of it was impossible to miss. She would not be dramatic about it. Drama was for people who needed an audience. She had spent 3 years learning to work without one. The certificate was still on the wall of her apartment. It said, Senior Analyst, Vance Logistics, Excellence in Operations. She had thought once or twice about taking it down. Not out of shame, the work it represented had been real. She thought about taking it down because it was a reminder of a version of her life that had been taken from her before she was done with it. She had decided to leave it up, not as a wound, as a record, The work had been real. What was taken from her did not unmake the work. And she was, it turned out, still the person who had done it. That had not gone anywhere. That had been waiting, in a drawer, in a folder, in numbers that had always been right, and would remain right regardless of who had been in the room to acknowledge them. She walked to her car. She got in. She turned on the heat. The city went on around her, as cities do, utterly indifferent to what had just taken place in a ballroom 6 blocks away. That was fine. She did not need the city to know. She did not need anyone to know. That had never been the point. The point had always been the same thing it had always been. The numbers either hold or they do not. Hers held. End.